Yellow and Red makes by Teach 27 in chapter 49. Naruto had never been so happy to see the imposing gates into Kumagakure. The journey there had been a long one, and to say that the mood was depressing would be like saying Iwanin only slightly disliked Minato Namikaze. Ever since the revelation regarding Taiyo's curse mark that at Orochimaru's base, the atmosphere around the ragtag group had been somber at the best of times. Only Yukimaru was able to bring a small amount of light into the otherwise bleak and dark days. Naruto had grown to enjoy the younger boy's company. Most of the time he could find a reason to be happy at anything. He could spend his time flitting from member of the group to another, chatting with Naruto, learning the flute from Tayuya, holding hands with Gurren, getting a piggyback ride from Gozu, or shyly walking alongside Fu, only briefly exchanging glances with one another. Naruto had felt something going on between those two, and honestly he was happy about it. Yukimaru was a great kid, someone he felt was perfect for his little sister. However, he wasn't really the matchmaking type, having been useless in romance until it was painfully pointed out to him by Tayuya. Instead, he just decided to let things run their natural course and let Fu do whatever made her happy. In his eyes, that was all that mattered. His mind deviating off of its brief but welcome tangent onto the topic that had been daunting him for days now. His eyes naturally drifted over to where Tayuya was walking in front of him, showing a few hand positions on her flute to Yukimaru, who simply watched, wrapped attention. He smiled at the sight before to use hair swayed at the right, revealing the stain of a mark on her neck before switching back over to covered. He sighed to himself, reviewing the plan he had been working over in his mind since leaving the land of water. He was fairly confident in himself and his skills, as was Tsuyu. Even so, he didn't want to do anything to hurt her, and was constantly checking these things over in his mind to make sure he made no mistakes whatsoever. When he had said Orochimaru's curse mark was a work of genius, he hadn't been exaggerating. The man had layered the seal over itself to try and hide many of the functions, not expecting anybody to go through the rigorous process of separating it out into its base components. To actually pull apart a seal that had been layered was without a doubt a painful process, if not done over weeks or possibly months. Luckily, Naruto was under no such restrictions with Sasuke. Now that he had a better understanding of what he was dealing with, he could replicate the process onto Yu painlessly. At least he hoped as much. Naruto barely noticed as they passed through the gates into Kumo, far too lost inside his own head to notice the change in scenery. Tayuya was watching him from the corner of her eye, even as she spoke to Yukimaru. Noting the way he seemed absent and distracted, she sighed internally, knowing that he was worried about her and was going over what he would still have to do in his head. She appreciated that he wanted to help her, but she had sort of missed him over the past few days. The closest the two had gotten was when they slept. Other than that, he would keep to himself at the back of the group, only really speaking to Yukimaru out of politeness. The group wound the way through the mountains paths and bridges that kept Kumo connected. Surprisingly, none of them received any strange looks or glances. Then again, to people who had to bear countless attacks from the Hachibi, a group of strange-looking travelers wasn't anything to talk about. A few seemed to recognize Naruto and Fu as they passed, giving friendly waves that only the mid-haired Jinchuriki returned. Tayuya wasn't the only one worrying about the way Naruto was behaving, and Fu could only hope he could return to normal after he had fixed Tayuya's seal. After another few minutes of trudging through the winding paths of the village, the group entered the Raikage's tower. They waited patiently while Naruto informed the secretary why they were here. The woman recognized Naruto and promptly went to see if the Raikage was busy. When she came back and said that he was free for the next few minutes, the group quickly made their way over to his simple inscribed door before politely knocking. "Yeah, come in." Naruto entered first, drawing a smile from the large Kage and his equally large companion, who just happened to be taking a break from training to visit his brother. "Yo, if it ain't little Nine, I hope you've been doing fine. You got to go tell little Miss too. She'll be excited to see you too, Fu." Naruto smiled warmly for the first time in a few days as he fist bumped B, enjoying the brief nostalgia the man's raps gave him. It's great to see you too, B-sensei. There's someone I want you to meet." Naruto put a hand on Tayuya's shoulder and moved her forward a bit so that B and the Raikage could see her better. Tayuya, not a natural vain person, suddenly found herself very self-conscious and began to twiddle the ends of her long hair nervously. Bea praised the girl, quickly smiling as he took in Naruto's girlfriend. A did likewise, but with a bit more subtlety. Allow me to introduce myself, Tayuya. I'm Killer B, but I bet you heard of me, yeah? Tayuya just gazed at him for a moment, the whole room going quiet as they waited for her verdict. Gently, she leaned across until her lips were right by Naruto's ear to whisper softly, "Does he always talk like that?" Naruto nodded with a small shrug, not really sure what Tayuya was talking about. He enjoyed the way B talked. In a way, it always reminded him that despite the dangerous and serious times they lived in, there was always time for fun and enjoyment of life. Towards the end of Naruto's stay in Kumo, the first time he had told B exactly this, the large man had solemnly taken off his shades, knelt down to Naruto's level, and given him a warm and genuine hug. B had thanked Naruto that day without a single rhyme, just honest, grateful words. Right then, I'm out of here. Without further ado, Tayuya bowed respectfully towards the Raikage, an unexpected action in itself, before quickly spinning on a heel and walking straight out of the office. Everyone just turned to watch her leave, noting the slightly curious expression on Mabui's face as the head passed her. Finally, everyone turned and stared at B. The man seemed to have gained a small rain cloud over his head as he hung in arms and limply muttering about people not understanding him and his raps. After a nervous chuckle broke the tension, the group returned to business with the attention turned to Naruto. Well, Naruto, it is always nice and interesting to have you visit. At that point, Naruto received a strange look from the Kurun, which he didn't return. I must ask you why you have come to Kuma with this group, two of which are known subordinates of Orochimaru himself. Naruto chuckled nervously, although his expression wasn't nearly as nervous as Kurun's. While she was Kunoichi confident in her own abilities, she couldn't take on the Raikage, his personal guards, Kumo's Anbu, and their two Jinchuriki, and all their shinobi, at least without a few scratches. I can explain that. He simply leaned back in his custom leather chair designed for his large bulk, waiting for him to do just that. Naruto moved ahead of the group, letting them know that he was going to look for Tayuya. They had gained a shinobi escort courtesy of the Raikage, purely to keep an eye on the former sound ninja. Kuren had said she understood completely, and had she been in the Raikage's place, she would have made a similar call. Naruto, of course, was well known throughout Kumo, so was given some leeway in the regard. So he left the others with their escort and moved off to look for Tayuya. He might have said he located her through his tracking skills, but honestly, he had placed a seal on her a long time ago that let him find her anywhere. It was incredibly useful. Of course, he simply could have used his Fuji no Iki to find her instantly, but for some reason it unnerved a lot of the Kumonin when he did that. So instead, he had to walk through the few streets, letting the seal on his arm tuck him in the right direction before he ducked under the flaps into a small ramen stand. He sat down on the stool next to you. The girl not showing him any notice as he did so. He waved a hand to the owner of the stall, ordering a miso ramen before letting him get back to his other customers. It was a curious thing, but Naruto had never tasted ramen before. There was no specific reason, but between moving around and training, he never really had the chance before. He waited patiently for his food to arrive as he swiveled on the seat to look at Tayuya. She hadn't moved since he had arrived, content to simply stare into the bowls of steaming broth and noodle in front of her. Why'd you run out back there? He saw Tayuya's shoulders shake a little as she chuckled silently before turning around herself, letting Naruto's blue eyes connect with her green ones. Oh, so now you suddenly care what I do? Naruto frowned, wondering where this came from as he tried to pry the answer from Tayuya's eyes alone, unsuccessfully. What are you talking about, Tayuya? He laid his hand atop hers, which was planted on the stall's counter, and thankfully she didn't pull away like he had feared she might. His confused gaze was met with a defiant and slightly hurt expression from his girlfriend. You know damn well what I'm talking about. You haven't said 3 words to me in the last few days. Not to let his head drop, knowing that she was right. He had been reclusive lately, but it was only because he cared for her. I mean, damn it, shithead! I thought we could tell each other anything. Naruto was about to speak, but he couldn't find his voice for some reason, like a part of him was telling him to just take to use verbal beating. Don't shut me out of your life, Naruto. If there's something wrong, fucking talk about it. And she drew a few irritated stares from the other patrons of the stall, but couldn't have cared less at this point. Like Naruto, she found herself under the influence of a little voice in her mind that wouldn't let her stop as the floodgates were already open. I get that you worry about me. I get that you only wanted to help me with this fucking curse mark, but listen to me very closely when I tell you this. She pulled his shirt so that he had no choice but to look directly into her emerald orbs. I I would bear this mark. I would bear this damn marker for the rest of my fucking life if it meant I wouldn't have to live without you. A few of the glares from the other customers turned into warm smiles as they took in the somewhat romantic speech. Nat, on the other hand, could only stare at his girlfriend, unable to think of anything intelligible to reply with. Tayuya firmly placed a hand over his mouth, even as the stall owner placed his order of ramen down on the counter. He quickly went, forgotten about the blonde shinobi, as he was unable to direct his attention away from his girlfriend. No, Naruto, this is important and hard to say, so just shut up. Naruto nodded with his eyes wide from behind her hand. In any other situation, she would have found it endearing, but she was too serious for that right now. I don't want you to even abandon me like that again, Naruto, because I love... You finally seemed to hesitate as her eyes flickered down to the counter. However, her mind flashed back 2 years, to when she had been unable to talk to this very boy about her emotions and all the trouble it cost her. With new confidence, she looked back up straight into Naruto's eyes. Because I love you. Finally, she allowed her hand to drop away from Naruto's mouth. Not that the blonde could say anything at that moment. Anyways, he was so far too shocked. Tayuya couldn't look at him in the face anymore, having become too embarrassed and frightened. Yes, frightened. She worried this was the very first time she had truly and utterly opened her heart to anybody, and she was scared to the core. Scared that Naruto wouldn't return her feelings. Scared that her dreams would be crushed. Scared that her train of thought was abruptly and thankfully cut off as she felt a pair of warm hands gently clasp her cheeks, guiding her face up until she was back to looking at Naruto's cerulean eyes. She had a brief moment to notice the tears that had gathered in the corner of his eyes before his face came forward and caught her own in a tender and gentle kiss. Tayuya naturally melted into the contact, her fears evaporating as all she could feel were Naruto's lips pressing against her own. There was no competition, no battle for dominance, just two people trying to accurately express how they felt to one another without words. Tayuya, I love you too, more than anything I thought possible. I love you so much. She didn't let him speak anymore as she initiated the kiss this time, and drawing it out so that she could just feel him against her more. If she wasn't so caught up in the moment, she might have noticed tears of her own slowly trickling down her cheeks after hearing his reply. Her heart felt lighter, her body felt warmer, and a pain that she didn't even know she had been bearing her whole life suddenly felt less intense. Naruto finally broke their kiss, only to replace it with a hug as he wrapped her up as tightly as he could, burying his face into her loose hair. I'm sorry, Tayuya-chan. I'll never leave you again. I'll never let anything hurt you again. Not even me. All Tayuya could do was smile. She literally couldn't have stopped it even if she wanted to. It just seemed the most natural thing to do. After a minute caught in each other's embrace, they finally noticed that they had become quite the spectacle for the other stall goers. The women watching had hearts in their eyes as they took in the scene, while the men were trying to hide the blushes, unable to admit how touching it had all been. What are you fuckers looking at? Never seen a girl fucking bare her heart, her soul before? Naruto could only laugh as he wiped away the tears. Tayuya knew just how to ruin any perfect moment. Not that he would change it for the world. Of course, the now embarrassed patrons quickly returned to what they had been doing, some of them leaving with a large blush over their faces. Tayuya turned back to Naruto, a warm smile set on her face as she pulled him up by the hand, leading him away from the stall in no particular direction. Naruto remembered to throw down some money on the counter, even though he hadn't managed to touch his bowl of ramen. You know, I still meant what I said to you. I will get that seal off of you, but I won't ignore you anymore. Tayuya smiled as she hugged his arm while they walked, nuzzling into his soft coat with her cheek as she did so. You know you will. I know you will, shithead. I know you were just worried about me and wanted to make sure you got everything right. Naruto smiled as he looked down at her, finding the interaction so adorable. He almost acted like some teenage tourist girl shouting kawaii. And so you're still going to call me shithead? Tayuya's smile brightened, even if it was only because it became slightly more devilish. Of course, why would I call you anything else? Are you fucking done yet? Tayuya had been sitting in the chair for what felt like hours now, but was probably close to 10 or 20 minutes, and Naruto had been examining her seal to determine if there were any differences between it and Sasuke's, so there wouldn't be any complications. Right now, she was just leaning over to one side while Naruto looked at her seal, taking notes where necessary. What? Yeah, I was done like 5 minutes ago. Taya looked up and around to see that Naruto wasn't anywhere near her. Instead, he was on the other side of the room, furiously going over his notes and calculations. Taya's eyes twitched a little, seeing him completely forgotten about her. Hey, what the fuck? Naruto looked up at the end of his ink brush in his mouth as he concentrated on the work he was doing. What? Tayuya just sighed, knowing that Naruto was far too absorbed at this point to even try and realize what he had done wrong. Instead, she just walked over, slapped him over the back of the head for good measure, and sat down on his lap. She leaned back into his chest even as he looked around for her, still intent on the notes in the scroll in front of him. Tayuya looked it over, and nothing but a bunch of lines and squiggles to her, but she had seen firsthand what they were capable of. The Fuji no Iki as case no point. And so, what are you doing now? Normally, to you wasn't really all that interested in sailing. It was too difficult for her. Far too much maths and impatience involved for her liking. However, seeing Naruto so riveted on one thing that wasn't her, it was enough to pique curiosity a little. I'm looking over the chakra converter array on the seal. When he saw Tayuya blank look, he sighed, smiling as he leaned back into the chair, wrapping his arm around her like a grandfather preparing to tell a grandchild the story. Basically, it's a series of seals that convert one form of chakra into another, like your spiral energy into physical. Tayuya still looked blank before staring at the mass of circles and squiggles on the page, trying to comprehend how they did that. I didn't know you could do something like that. Naruto chuckled and shrugged. Yeah, neither did I, but it's the only explanation I can find for the array. Tayuya just nodded, gradually losing interest as she felt Naruto's body heat radiate through her, exciting her and pulling her mind onto more distracting topics. So, what kind of chakra does it convert them? Again, she wasn't really interested, more keeping the conversation alive for the hell of it. She found Naruto was much happier if she pretended to take interest in the things that he enjoyed. It was besides the point that he would then return the favor tenfold, but Naruto was just like that anyway. That's the funny thing. It took me ages to recognize, but if I remember our academy days, then it's nature chakra. Tayuya furrowed her brow, trying to think back to all those boring lessons with Baki Sensei, where he would try and drill this stuff into her head, mostly unsuccessfully. I thought humans couldn't use senjutsu without special training. Naruto smiled positively glowed as he felt that Tayuya really could contribute to the conversation. He loved it when she took on interest. That's the part that makes the seal so brilliant. The user doesn't use the nature chakra. The seal converts it into regular chakra, except it's a hurry job, so it becomes more potent. That coupled with the enzyme I told you about earlier, which I believed is responsible for the transformation, is the reason the seal degrades the user over time. Actually, if Orochimaru had just tweaked it a bit more, he could have been giving his followers a much less potent dose of chakra, but kept the seal completely safe. Tayuya looked at him strangely. What about the enzyme? Naruto waved his hand towards one side of the scroll where complicated notions of specific chemical formula littered the page. There's nothing inherently dangerous about the enzyme. In fact, it's a completely natural compound, probably some kind of extra from a Genkai user. The problem is that the untempered nature chakra doesn't react well with it when the transformation is triggered. If I and all of those medical scrolls I've been reading are right, it's the cause for the skin discoloration and changes in the sclera. Tayuya was actually rather interested in this now. Somehow Naruto had a way of making a dull topic seem relatable, or maybe it was because he seemed to be hinting towards something. What are you getting at, Naruto? She knew if she could call him a shithead, it would only distract him from the conversation. Naruto seemed to take a deep breath before smiling kindly down at her. I'm saying that we wouldn't have to remove your seal. I could alter it to make it better and less damaging. He waited a few moments as silence descended over the room. But I can still get rid of it if you. Tayuya stopped him by pressing her hand up against his lips, staring him in the eyes. And you would be safe. No complications. Naruto chuckled lightly. Yeah, if I could just get a hold of some of that enzyme, I might put one on myself. Tayuya just maintained her level stare, not looking away from Naruto's eyes, still until he sighed and pulled her in closer. I'm not a medic, Tayuya. There could always be problems, but I assure you, I would never attempt this if I ever thought it would hurt you. I made sure to isolate the part of the seal that stops your body from violently rejecting the enzyme. Probably what caused the one in 10 deaths for Orochimaru. For Orochimaru. That way, I can make sure I don't accidentally get rid of it. Taiyo leaned back into Naruto's chest, staring out the single window in the room that looked over the cloud-covered mountains of Kumo. She thought about it for a while, considering everything. On the one hand, the seal would always be a reminder of what Orochimaru did to her. On the other, it would be amazing to use it against him. She could imagine the look on his face. If Naruto created a seal better than his own, he'd be furious. Plus, she could imagine the edge it would give her in a fight. She had seen what Sasuke could do, even if Naruto had kicked his ass. Okay, her voice was quiet and meek, still rather unsure of herself. Until are you sure? I mean, she stopped Naruto from talking again, this time with a quick peck on his lips. I'm sure. I trust you, Naruto, with my life. Naruto was speechless for a few moments before he smiled warmly and pulled Taiyo in closer. They shared the chair a while, just enjoying the company of the other, while talking about nothing in particular. Both, however, were thinking about the days to come and what this new change would bring. It was only a matter of time now before Naruto felt he was ready. Taiyo shivered in the cold, spacious room, as she supposed that was only natural for what was essentially a dungeon beneath the Raikage Tower. Unfortunately, it was the only room that met Naruto's exact specifications. Now that Taiyo was reluctant because of that. Like Naruto, she was nervous, and if Naruto felt that something was necessary for this to go right, then she wasn't going to argue, even if it felt like her teeth were going to break from shattering. She envied Naruto for his natural invulnerability to cold. She couldn't even go over and use him to warm up, or she might break his concentration as he went about the room, drawing out the seals. She had seen him draw them before, but never this slowly and carefully, and never this complicated. Hundreds upon hundreds of kanji littered the floor, sometimes in concentric circles, other times in swirls or wavy lines. After half an hour of this, though, it was blatantly obvious that the focal point was the very center of the room, where Taiyo supposed she would be lying. And she didn't really fancy the idea of lying down on the cold concrete floor, but she supposed if it was necessary, she could bear it. At that point, Naruto got up, stretched his back after crouching down for so long, and walked over. This is a little awkward, but you have to take your clothes off. Taiyo just stared at Naruto while he had grown a second head. Are you fucking serious? It's freezing in here. Naruto just looked around curiously. It shouldn't have surprised her that he hadn't even noticed it. Instantly, she felt the area around them warm up as Naruto began to release a warm area of weak chakra, just enough to ward off the chill. Taiyo simply sighed. He had the worst timing sometimes. Fine. Let's just get this over with. She walked over into the center of the room, careful not to disturb any of the careful placed drawings on the floor while stripping. Well, you don't have to. Naruto just watched Taiyo unclipped her bra before shimmying out of the rest of her underwear. What was that, shithead? Naruto just kept staring at her in a daze, unable to take his eyes off of her perfect form. Nothing. Taiyo stared at him oddly before shrugging and carefully lying down in the area indicated by the lack of kanji in a vaguely human-shaped space. Naruto managed to shake himself off of his daze before smiling brightly and walking over, already preparing his ink brush. He was particularly proud of his brush. It had seals with copious amounts of ink sealed inside that it would slowly release onto the brush itself. The actual brush was a single strand of very firm and very durable hair, which meant he could be very precise and accurate with his funjutsu and create very small seals. He set to work on Taiyo's body and carefully inking out the required patterns and seals across her naked body. She would giggle occasionally from the feel of the brush moving across her bare skin, but she was good and didn't move. Naruto was also good for his part, not letting himself get distracted by Taiyo's tantalizing flesh laid bare in front of him. In no time at all, but still too much for Taiyo's liking. He was finished and looked down at her with a slight blush. I didn't want to mention this, but I need to bite you. Taiyo raised an eyebrow but didn't move, mostly because she wouldn't dare by this point. I didn't realize you were into the kinky stuff. Naruto just chuckled sheepishly before vaguely pointing to where the faintest of marks still lay from Naruto's from Orochimaru's original placing of the seal. It's to trigger an inflammatory response and get your adrenaline moving in the area to evenly disperse the enzyme around your body. That suppression seal has kept it all pent up, and if I release it all in one one area too suddenly, it might cause a mutation, or worse. Taya didn't particularly fancy finding out what worse was, but she didn't really fancy getting bitten. Isn't there another way? Naruto smiled and shrugged. I could slap you. Taya scowled before sighing deeply and letting her head slump back softly to the floor. Fine, but if I feel you sucking, then it's a stake through the heart for you. Naruto laughed warmly before cracking his knuckles and stretching out his neck, letting a large grin wash over his features. Let's do this. He concentrated chakra onto his hand, letting it build up, and he built up his fingertips before a blue fire burst out over each digit. He carefully placed it over to Yu's seal before taking a deep breath and twisting harshly, simultaneously unlocking it and activating all the seals he had set up in the room. Immediately, like a flood, the kanji rushed across the room, winding around and around like they were caught in a whirlpool towards the seal that was now glowing a dangerous red. Naruto waited until the exact moment when the seals unlocked the enzyme from spreading into Taiyo's system before leaning down and swiftly biting it into her neck. He was careful to place his canines above the marks Orochimaru made so that she wouldn't get any new marks. Tayuya was already squirming from the strange sensation the procedure was giving her. It wasn't unpleasant or painful, just strange. Suddenly she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder before something warm began spreading through her body, sending pleasure throughout her body. Naruto sat up, watching the small amount of blood trickle away from the two small bite marks he had made. He frowned at the taste in his mouth, wondering what uncle saw in tasting blood. It wasn't exactly terrible, but it wasn't really all that good either. He considered asking her about it, but didn't much think he would like the answer. That, and it would start to bring up a lot of questions about why he had drank blood, which would in turn lead to teasing. He looked down again to see the last of the seals safely enter the three tomo before watching, astonished, as it slowly shifted and became a small spiral. He hadn't foreseen the design. He hadn't foreseen the design of the seal itself changing, but for some reason he felt it was an improvement. He figured it was because of his name. Uzumaki meant whirlpool, after all, and it briefly made him consider making this his trademark for seals if he found a way it happened. If he found out why it happened. Once the sealing process was finished, Taiyo was left panting and breathless. Her skin was flush and had a fine sheen of sweat that caught the light, making her shine slightly. Naruto helped her up into a sitting position, as it was quite obvious Taiyo was fairly incapable of moving at the moment. She was looking around the room with lidded eyes until they came to rest on Naruto's concentrated face. He had seen her writhing on the floor, but had mistaken it for pain. He had been sure that the procedure wouldn't be painful, except for the biting. How do you feel? Taiyo slowly brought a weak arm up and touched it to the new design on her neck, rubbing her finger over the skin like she had never felt it before. She couldn't believe it, but that dull, aching throb she had to put up with for the last 2 years was finally gone. The realization struck her hard, and after a few blinks to make absolutely sure this wasn't all a dream, she turned around and launched herself at Naruto, toppling him to the floor in a mighty hug. Amazing! Better than amazing! Fantastic! Her eyes were sparkling, and it brought a smile to Naruto's face as he helped her up. At that point, both of them realized that Yu was still quite naked, so Naruto quickly ran over and got her clothes, while Yu noticed the small ceiling array that was still on the floor, and fearing that something might have gone wrong with the process, she pointed it out to Naruto when he came back. What's that? Naruto just smiled devilishly, looking at the small seal with a hint of malice. The fragment of Orochimaru's soul had to go somewhere. Taiyo shivered at the sight of Naruto's evil look. It didn't fit his face at all, and she could only imagine what he had done to Orochimaru's soul as she looked at the seemingly harmless set of squiggles on the floor. Orochimaru was still reeling from the defeat of Sasuke, mostly due to the conditions the cubic container had left him in. He had gone away from the base for a few days to deal with some troublesome Konoha shinobi who were prying a bit too close, as he had come back to a half-destroyed base and an even more wrecked Uchiha. Not only that, but after he had calmed down, he found out somebody had put a blocking seal over Sasuke's curse mark, a damn good one too. It was all enough that he had to vent his anger out on a few subordinates. So it's suffice to say that the echoes of screams would be filtered through the base for a few days. Currently, he was pensively sitting in a large throne-like chair, mulling over everything that had gone wrong and what he would have to do to fix it when the blinding pain ripped through him. It was like when the old man had first sealed his arms away. The blind numbing pain tore through his body, but was most intent right behind his eye. He had no way to be sure as he writhed on the floor, but he just knew who was responsible for this. Curse you, Uzumaki! Kabuto rushed into the room a few seconds later, confused at the sight he had walked in on. Orochimaru was unconscious on the floor. Blood was streaming from his eyes like tears like tears and embarrassingly, the medic noticed that the snake Sanina had sold himself from the pain. End of chapter 49.